Commander Vex Marlock had seen plenty of species claim they were warriors. The galaxy was full of them, really. Big talkers with bigger egos, waving around their plasma cannons and gravity hammers like children showing off their toys. But humans? Oh, humans were supposed to be different. Special. The so-called apex predators of their little blue marble. What a joke. Standing in the observation deck of the Galactic Council's newest diplomatic vessel, the Serenity's Edge, Vex watched as the human delegation's shuttle approached. 3 months of negotiations ahead, and already he could feel his patience wearing thin. His forearms crossed in practiced disdain, the Cytherian commander's purple skin rippling with barely contained annoyance. "Sir," Lieutenant Kara Joth, his aide, approached with that nervous shuffle she always did when delivering news he wouldn't like. "The human delegation is requesting permission to bring their cultural artifacts aboard." Cultural artifacts. Vex's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a laugh among his people. "Let me guess. Primitive weapons they're trying to pass off as ceremonial items." "Actually, sir, they've been quite upfront about their nature. The manifests several firearms, bladed instruments, and what appears to be jewelry made from ammunition components." Now that was interesting. Most species tried to hide their more violent tendencies during first contact protocols. These humans were advertising theirs? Either they were incredibly stupid or, no, they were just stupid, had to be. Grant their request, Vex decided, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension he'd perfected over decades of dealing with lesser civilizations. "I want to see what passes for weaponry among these hairless apes." The docking bay hummed with activity as the human shuttle settled into place. Vex had positioned himself where he could observe the delegation's arrival while maintaining what his military instructors had called tactical superiority through elevation. In other words, he stood on a platform so he could literally look down on them. The shuttle door hissed open with a sound that reminded Vex of his morning coffee machine. How appropriate. Even their technology sounded mundane. The first human to emerge was a woman, maybe 50 standard years old, with steel grey hair pulled back in what Vex's briefing materials had called a bun. She wore a simple dark suit, the kind of outfit that screamed bureaucrat in any language. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, according to his files. A career diplomat, former military, blah blah blah. But it was the second human that made Vex pause. The man was perhaps 40 Earth years, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of scars that didn't come from diplomatic accidents. He wore what appeared to be a formal military uniform, deep blue with gold trim, but it was the casual way he carried himself that caught Vex's attention. Not the rigid posture of a soldier trying to impress, but the relaxed confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Colonel Marcus Webb, the file said, military attaché and weapons specialist. And hanging around his neck, glinting under the bay's harsh lighting, was a necklace that made Vex's blood run cold. And bullets. Actual projectile ammunition, strung together like some barbaric trophy. Each one was different, some brass, some steel, some with markings Vex couldn't identify from this distance. They hung against the human's chest like a confession of violence, a promise of what he was capable of. "Fascinating," Vex murmured, his earlier disdain shifting into something that might have been respect. Or perhaps just professional curiosity. The third human was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested either genius or madness. Dr. Sarah Vance, according to the manifest. Technology specialist and, apparently, the human responsible for adapting their crude weapons for potential galactic use. As the delegation approached his platform, Vex noticed that each human carried themselves differently. The ambassador moved with political precision, every gesture calculated for maximum diplomatic impact. The doctor kept glancing around with barely contained excitement, clearly fascinated by her first time aboard an alien vessel. But the colonel moved like death in a dress uniform. Each step was measured, purposeful, economical. He didn't look around in wonder or try to make a good impression. He simply existed in the space around him like he owned it. Commander Marlock, Ambassador Vasquez stepped forward, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of a professional peacemaker. Thank you for accommodating our request. I know bringing weapons aboard a diplomatic vessel is unusual. Unusual, Vex repeated, his translator rendering his amusement as a sound somewhere between a chuckle and a growl. Yes, that's one word for it. Tell me, Ambassador, is it common practice for your species to wear instruments of death as jewelry? He gestured toward Colonel Webb's necklace, expecting embarrassment or perhaps an awkward explanation about Earth customs. Instead, the Colonel smiled. It wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. Each one tells a story, Commander, Webb said, his voice carrying a rough edge that suggested he'd spent years shouting orders over gunfire. This one, he touched a particularly large bullet near the center of the necklace, took out a hostile sniper at 800 meters, saved my entire squad. He moved to another bullet, smaller with strange markings etched into its side. This beauty ended a 3-day siege. One shot through 2 walls and a barricade right into the enemy commander's brain housing group. Webb's smile grew wider. Amazing what you can accomplish with crude technology and a little creativity. Vex felt his mandibles twitch. Either this human was an accomplished liar, or he was standing in front of someone who collected trophies from his kills, like some kind of primitive death worshipper. Impressive claims, Vex said carefully, though I confess I'm curious about your species' attachment to such antiquated weapons. Surely you must realize that projectile weapons are centuries behind current galactic standard. Are they? Dr. Vance spoke up for the first time, her voice carrying the kind of excitement that made Vex's skin crawl. Because I've been studying your plasma rifles, Commander, and I have to say, they're fascinating pieces of technology. Elegant, efficient, completely useless in about 40% of combat scenarios, but still very impressive. Vex's 4 eyes narrowed. Useless. Oh yes. Vance pulled out a small device, something that looked like a cross between a calculator and a medical scanner. Plasma weapons are terrible in electromagnetic fields, completely ineffective underwater, prone to overheating in desert environments, and don't even get me started on their performance in zero-gravity situations. But they do make lovely light shows. The casual dismissal hit Vex like a physical blow. He'd spent 15 years mastering plasma rifle techniques, had earned 3 commendations for marksmanship, and this child was calling his weapon useless. And I suppose your projectile weapons don't have similar limitations? He asked, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. Colonel Webb laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Commander, I fired bullets in vacuum, underwater, in electromagnetic storms, and once during a solar flare that would have fried every piece of electronic equipment within 50 kilometers. They worked every single time. Because they're simple, Ambassador Vasquez added, clearly trying to steer the conversation back toward diplomacy. Our weapons don't rely on complex energy matrices or exotic matter. They use basic physics. Kinetic energy, chemical reactions. Things that work the same way whether you're on a paradise world or in the depths of space. Vex wanted to argue, to point out the obvious flaws in their reasoning. These projectile weapons were limited by ammunition. They had slower rates of fire than energy weapons. They were affected by gravity and wind resistance and a dozen other factors that plasma bolts simply ignored. But something in the Colonel's eyes stopped him. There was a confidence there, a certainty that went beyond bragging or bluster. This was a man who had tested his weapons in the crucible of actual combat and found them adequate to the task. More than adequate, if that necklace was any indication. Very well, Vex said finally. I confess myself curious about your methods. Perhaps you would be willing to provide a demonstration. The 3 humans exchanged glances, and Vex caught something in their expressions that he didn't like. It was the look of people who had been hoping for exactly this question. Of course, Ambassador Vasquez said smoothly, we'd be delighted to show you what human weapons can do. Though I should warn you, our methods can be intense. Intense? Vex's mandibles clicked again, but this time it wasn't amusement. Ambassador, I've witnessed the firepower of a Thrakari battle cruiser. I've seen Xelon shock troops reduce a fortified position to component atoms in under 30 seconds. I think I can handle whatever your species considers intense. Colonel Webb's grin turned positively predatory. Famous last words, Commander. Famous last words. 2 hours later, Vex found himself in the ship's main cargo bay, watching the humans set up what they called a basic demonstration. The space had been cleared and configured as a makeshift firing range, with targets set at various distances and behind different types of cover. Now, Dr. Vance was saying as she assembled something that looked like a rifle crossed with a small artillery piece, the key to understanding human weapons philosophy is realizing that we don't just shoot at things. We shoot through things. She hefted the weapon, which she'd identified as something called a 50 caliber anti-material rifle, and pointed it toward the far end of the bay, where a series of barriers had been set up. Steel plates, energy shields, even a chunk of that supposedly impenetrable Catherian battle armor that Vex's own people used for their heavy assault troops. This particular round, she continued, sliding a bullet the size of Vex's thumb into the weapon's chamber, is designed to penetrate hardened targets. The projectile core is depleted uranium wrapped in a tungsten jacket with a shaped charge tip that activates on impact. Depleted uranium. Vex's aide, Lieutenant Joth, leaned forward with interest. But that's a radioactive substance. Isn't it dangerous to handle? Colonel Webb snorted. Lady, everything we do is dangerous. That's what makes it fun. The demonstration began with Dr. Vance lying prone behind her massive rifle, eye pressed to a scope that looked like it belonged on a telescope. She made a few minor adjustments, muttered something under her breath about wind resistance in an enclosed space, and then squeezed the trigger. The sound was indescribable. Not the clean zip crack of a plasma rifle or the controlled hum of a particle beam. This was raw, primal violence given voice. A thunderclap that seemed to shake the entire cargo bay and left Vex's ears ringing despite his protective gear. The bullet, meanwhile, had passed through the steel plate like it was tissue paper, punched a hole straight through the energy shield without even slowing down, and buried itself so deep in the Catherian armor that only the back half of the round was visible. Holy Lieutenant Joth began, then caught herself before completing what was clearly going to be a profanity. It's the beauty of kinetic weapons. Colonel Webb said conversationally, as if he hadn't just witnessed the casual destruction of military-grade defenses, is that they don't care about your shields or your armor or your fancy force fields. Mass times velocity equals a very bad day for whoever's standing in the way. Vex stared at the smoking hole in what had been considered the most advanced personal protection his species could manufacture. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone. Actually, Doctor, Vance said as she began disassembling her rifle, the energy requirements are surprisingly modest. We're not generating exotic particles or maintaining containment fields. We're just accelerating a piece of metal to very high speeds using controlled chemical explosions. It's almost embarrassingly simple. Simple. Vex found himself repeating that word a lot today. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Ambassador Vasquez smiled. Commander, would you like to see our sidearms demonstration? Before Vex could answer, Colonel Webb had produced a pistol from somewhere inside his uniform. It was smaller than the rifle, obviously, but there was something about its design that spoke of lethal efficiency. No unnecessary ornamentation, no complex energy displays. Just a tool designed for one purpose. This, Webb said, holding the weapon with the casual familiarity of long practice, is a 45 caliber handgun. Its effective range of about 50 meters, though I've made shots at twice that distance when the situation called for it. It uses the same basic principle as the rifle, just scaled down for portability. He turned toward another set of targets, these ones designed to simulate various alien physiologies. Vex recognized the mock-ups: Thrakari, Xelon, Cathirian, even a few species he didn't immediately identify. The interesting thing about bullets, Webb continued, raising the pistol in a two-handed grip, is that they're completely non-discriminatory. Doesn't matter if you're made of flesh or chitin or crystallized energy. If you have mass, kinetic energy will ruin your day. The pistol barked 6 times in rapid succession, each shot perfectly timed and placed. When the echoes faded, each of the target mock-ups had a neat hole punched through what would have been vital organs. 6 shots, 6 kills, Webb said matter-of-factly as he began reloading. And I still have 7 rounds left in the magazine, plus 2 spare magazines in case things get interesting. Vex felt something cold crawling up his spine. You carry additional ammunition. Commander, Dr. Vance said with the tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a child, did you think we'd design weapons that could only fire once? Each of us is carrying enough ammunition for sustained combat operations. The colonel alone has about 200 rounds on his person. 200. Vex did the mental math. If each bullet could potentially kill an opponent, and if the humans were even half as accurate as they claimed to be. Of course, Ambassador Vasquez added with diplomatic smoothness, we're hoping it won't come to that. This is, after all, a peaceful mission. Peaceful, right, because nothing said peace like walking into negotiations wearing a necklace made of bullets and carrying enough firepower to level a small city. I think, Vex said slowly, that we should continue this conversation in a more private setting. There are aspects of human military doctrine that the Council should be made aware of. The 3 humans exchanged another one of those looks, and Vex realized with growing unease that they'd been expecting this reaction too. Of course, Commander, Ambassador Vasquez agreed. We're always happy to share information with our potential allies. Though I should mention what you've seen today represents only the most basic examples of human weaponry. Basic examples. Lieutenant Joth squeaked. Colonel Webb's grin was positively feral now. Ma'am, we haven't even shown them the explosives yet. As they left the cargo bay, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that everything he thought he knew about warfare was about to change. These humans, with their crude weapons and casual attitude toward violence, might just be the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered. And the terrifying part, he was starting to suspect they knew it. Commander Vex Marlock's private quarters had never felt smaller. The 4 humans now crowded into his personal space seemed to radiate a casual lethality that made his skin crawl. Ambassador Vasquez sat primly in the chair he'd offered her, while Dr. Vance had somehow managed to turn his coffee table into an impromptu weapons display. Colonel Webb simply stood near the viewport, hands clasped behind his back, watching the stars like he was calculating firing solutions. The 4th human, introduced as Captain Lisa Torres, had arrived during their walk from the cargo bay. She wore the same dark blue uniform as Webb, but her specialty was apparently something called demolitions and urban warfare. The way she'd smiled when Webb mentioned explosives had made Vex seriously consider checking his life insurance policy. So Vex began, settling his 4 arms in what he hoped looked like a relaxed position. When you say explosives, oh, we've got all kinds. Torres interrupted, her enthusiasm making Vex's mandibles twitch nervously. Fragmentation grenades, shaped charges, thermite compounds, plastic explosives, incendiary devices, fuel air bombs. My personal favorite is something we call a daisy cutter, though technically that's more of an area denial weapon than a precision instrument. Dr. Vance looked up from whatever she was assembling on his table. Don't forget the nuclear devices, Lisa. Nuclear devices. Of course they had nuclear devices. Ah yes, Vex said weakly, your species' famous atomic weapons. The Council is well aware of humanity's nuclear capabilities. Are you? Webb turned from the viewport, his expression suggesting that Vex might be in for another unpleasant surprise. Because most species we've encountered seem to think nuclear weapons are just bigger bombs. They're not. They're not. Lieutenant Joth, who had been standing quietly by the door, finally spoke up. Nuclear weapons are terror devices, Ambassador Vasquez explained with the clinical detachment of someone discussing weather patterns. The explosion is almost secondary to the psychological impact. When you detonate a nuclear device, you're not just destroying a target. You're sending a message that says we can erase your civilization whenever we feel like it. But surely, Vex protested, no civilized species would actually use such weapons. The radiation alone. Commander, Torres said gently, we didn't just use them. We used them twice. Against our own species. During our first global war. The silence that followed was so complete that Vex could hear the ship's air recycling system cycling in the walls. You used nuclear weapons, he said slowly, against other humans. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Dr. Vance confirmed without looking up from her work. August 6th and 9th, 1945. He killed about 200,000 people, ended the war, and established humanity as the only species crazy enough to actually deploy weapons of mass destruction in anger. Vex felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the universe. Every species the Council had encountered possessed the theoretical capability for creating world-ending weapons. It was an inevitable step in technological development, but actually using them, against your own kind. The beautiful thing about humans, Webb continued, is that we don't bluff. When we say we'll do something, we mean it. Because we've already proven we're willing to do whatever it takes to win. Vex searched for words, that's monstrous. That's effective, Ambassador Vasquez corrected. We haven't had a global conflict since. Sometimes the threat of overwhelming retaliation is the best way to maintain peace. Dr. Vance finally looked up from the device she'd been working on. Speaking of overwhelming retaliation, would you like to see our latest innovation in personal defense? Before Vex could answer, she held up what looked like an ordinary human handgun. This appears to be a standard 9mm pistol, correct? I suppose? Wrong. Vance's smile was terrifying in its innocence. This is a prototype electromagnetic railgun disguised as a conventional firearm. It accelerates a tungsten penetrator to approximately 15% the speed of light. 15%. The speed of light? That's impossible, Vex whispered. Is it? Vance turned the weapon over in her hands like it was a toy. We miniaturized the power source using a hybrid fusion cell, wrapped the barrel in superconducting coils, and added a small AI to calculate trajectory and target acquisition. The projectile is only 2 grams, but at that velocity. She shrugged. Well, let's just say armor becomes a theoretical concept. Captain Torres laughed. Vance, you're scaring the aliens. I'm educating them, Vance replied primly. There's a difference. Vex's communicator chirped, and he answered it with shaking hands. Marlock here. Commander? The voice belonged to Admiral Korith, his superior and the ranking Cytherian on the Council. I'm receiving some interesting reports from your location. Something about human weapons demonstrations. Admiral, I think we need to discuss the human application for Council membership. Oh? Having second thoughts about their primitive technology. Vex glanced around the room at the 4 humans, each of whom was now watching him with the focused attention of apex predators evaluating prey. Sir, I strongly recommend we approve their application immediately. Marlock, are you feeling well? This morning you called them hairless apes with delusions of military competence. This morning I was an idiot, Vex said flatly. Admiral, these humans have weaponized everything. They wear bullets as jewelry. They carry enough firepower to level cities. They've miniaturized weapons that violate 3 separate laws of physics. And they did it all using what they call basic chemistry and simple machines. The silence on the other end of the communication lasted long enough for Vex to wonder if the connection had been severed. Admiral. Commander, are you suggesting that the humans represent a military threat to the Council? Vex looked at Colonel Webb, who had gone back to staring out the viewport. The man's reflection in the transparent aluminum showed that predatory smile again, but Admiral, I'm suggesting that the humans represent a military threat to everyone. The only question is whether we want them as allies or enemies. Surely you're exaggerating. Ambassador Vasquez, Vex said, would you be willing to speak with Admiral Kurith? The human diplomat activated her own communication device, and suddenly the room was filled with the Admiral's distinctive voice. Admiral Kurith, this is Ambassador Elena Vasquez, representing Earth in these negotiations. I understand you have some concerns about humanity's military capabilities. Ambassador, Commander Marlock seems to believe that your species poses some sort of existential threat to galactic civilization. I'm sure you can understand why we might find such claims difficult to believe. Of course, Admiral, it's natural to be skeptical. Perhaps it would help if I mentioned that the ship you're currently aboard, the Serenity's Edge, is well within range of our orbital defense platforms. Another silence, this one much longer. I beg your pardon? Dr. Vance spoke up cheerfully. Oh yes, we've had you tracked since you entered the Sol system. Lovely ship, by the way. Kytherian design. Isn't it? We've been studying the specifications in our databases. The hull should be able to withstand approximately 47 of our standard ship killer missiles before suffering catastrophic structural failure. 47 missiles. Admiral Kurith's voice had gone very quiet. Give or take, Captain Torres added. Depends on where we hit you, really. The fusion reactors are remarkably well protected, but there are some interesting vulnerabilities in your shield generator assemblies. You've been targeting our ship. We've been targeting everything, Colonel Webb said without turning from the viewport. Every council vessel, every military installation, every populated world within 50 light years. It's called situational awareness, Admiral. We like to know where all the pieces are before we sit down to play. Vex watched the color drain from his own reflection in the communication screen. Admiral, I need you to understand something. The humans aren't asking to join the council because they need our protection. They're asking to join because they're being polite. Polite? Ambassador Vasquez nodded. It seemed rude to simply announce that we were expanding into galactic space without consulting the existing governments. We prefer diplomacy to conquest, but we're prepared for either outcome. You're threatening the council? Heavens no, Vasquez replied with genuine-sounding shock. We're offering partnership. The threats are just context. So you understand the alternatives. Dr. Vance held up another device, this one looking like a small tablet. Would you like to see our preliminary terraforming assessments for the major council worlds? We've identified 17 planets that would be suitable for human colonization with minimal atmospheric processing. 17 of our worlds? Oh, these aren't your worlds yet, Torres said casually. These are uninhabited systems that we've marked for expansion. Though I suppose if you wanted to contest our claims, that would be interesting. The communication channel filled with what sounded like frantic whispering in the background. Vex could make out at least 3 different voices, all speaking in rapid, panicked Kytherian. Admiral? Ambassador Vasquez inquired politely. Are you still with us? Ambassador, let me make sure I understand the situation correctly. Humanity is requesting council membership, while simultaneously demonstrating the capability to destroy our fleets, conquer our worlds, and terraform our space. That's a very negative way of looking at it, Vasquez replied. We prefer to think of it as showing that we can be valuable allies in any future conflicts. What future conflicts? Webb finally turned from the viewport, and his expression was deadly serious. Admiral, the galaxy is a dangerous place. Sooner or later you're going to encounter a species that's genuinely hostile. When that happens, you'll want humans on your side. And if we refuse your membership application... The 4 humans exchanged glances, and Vex realized he was about to witness something historic. Either the birth of a new galactic alliance, or the first shot of a war that would reshape known space. Then we'll respect your decision, Ambassador Vasquez said quietly, and proceed with our expansion independently, without council oversight or input. The implications hung in the air like a loaded weapon. I see. Admiral Corith's voice had taken on the careful neutrality of someone who had just realized they were holding a live grenade. And if we approve your application, then we become partners, Vasquez replied warmly. We share our technology, our resources, our knowledge. We help defend Council space against external threats. We contribute to galactic civilization instead of replacing it. Your technology? Vex found himself asking. You mean your weapons? Dr. Vance grinned. Commander, our weapons are just applied physics. Wait until you see our medical technology. We've cured death, technically speaking. The only reason people still die on Earth is personal choice or catastrophic accidents. They'd cured death. Of course they had. Admiral, Vex said into the communicator, I'm recommending immediate approval of Humanity's Council application. Full membership, with all associated rights and privileges. Commander, don't you think we should discuss this with the full Council? Admiral, respectfully, I think the full Council should be very grateful that these humans prefer talking to shooting. Because based on what I've seen today, we wouldn't enjoy the alternative. Another long pause, filled with more frantic whispering. Very well, Admiral Corith said finally. Ambassador Vasquez, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I hereby extend an invitation for humanity to join our organization as a full member species. We look forward to a long and peaceful partnership. Excellent, Vasquez beamed. We're delighted to be working with you. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. As the communication ended, Vex slumped in his chair, emotionally exhausted. Around him, the four humans began packing up their demonstration materials with the casual efficiency of people who had just completed a routine task. You know, he said to no one in particular, when I woke up this morning I thought humans were primitive barbarians with delusions of competence. Colonel Webb chuckled as he carefully placed his necklace back around his neck. Commander, we are primitive barbarians. We're just very, very good at it. The secret, Captain Torres added as she sealed her explosives back into their containment case, is that we've turned barbarism into a science. Dr. Vance looked up from disassembling her railgun, with proper funding and peer review, of course. Ambassador Vasquez stood and smoothed her skirt. Commander Marlock, thank you for your hospitality. I think today has been very productive for all parties involved. As the humans filed out of his quarters, Vex realized that galactic civilization had just changed forever. Humanity wasn't joining the Council as junior partners or supplicants. They were taking their place as the apex predators of known space. And somehow, despite everything he'd learned about their casual attitude toward violence and their terrifying military capabilities, Vex felt safer knowing they were on his side. After all, there were other species out there in the dark between stars, species that might not be as interested in diplomacy as the humans had been today. When that time came, Vex thought as he poured himself a stiff drink, it would be very good to have friends who wore bullets as jewelry and treated thermonuclear weapons as conversation starters. Very good indeed.